We have got a whole range of questions that have come in on the Q&A. I'm going to read the question and call across on some of our panelists to respond. So question one, can our existing distribution network take the extra load? Can our transformers take the extra load in the sense that they have been serviced for many years?
Yeah, thank you, colleagues, for the question. I think the question is at what level would this evolution of load happen? I think let's take a European case study. Key to this is most of the growth are happening due to the evolution of EV cars, batteries, and those things that really is congesting, creating major congestion on the LV networks and MV networks. I think that penetration will take significant time before South Africa reaches that point. So from an LV side, your LV transformers normally run to failure. With regards to the grid constraint that you have on the sub-transmission and distribution side, yeah, colleagues, I think I've showed you a map where a number of the areas and networks are significantly constrained. And so significant investment would require in the distribution network, be it on the sub-transmission LV side. And this is not even attempting to accommodate the future IPPs that will be distributed across the distribution network to be integrated to the national grid. So it depends on where we see the growth is going to happen. And I do believe certain areas are going to grow faster, such i.e. areas where smart cities will evolve from, areas where our big, large communions or customers or residential parks, and that will definitely be kept in itself. But we'll have to invest in distribution networks. Yeah, thank you.
Thanks, Malcolm. Shall we move on then to question number two, which is, why would one use a seriously energy inefficient technology such as blockchain? I will give an initial first pass response, and I think sometimes we have the presumption that blockchain is going to apply to a unit of electricity in the form of a kilowatt hour. And in that context, I don't think one is seriously proposing the use of a blockchain to manage a kilowatt hour, because the sums don't add up. The amount of energy that you're going to consume to add to the block doesn't work. Where there is opportunity for blockchain technology is around creating an embedded smart contract that describes devices beyond the meter, whether that is a distributed energy resource like a generator, or a storage device, a smart inverter, or some kind of demand response where I manage and reduce that and flex that load profile. The smart contract that describes and permissions the control of those devices is what needs to be on the blockchain. And then what we're looking for is digitalization that can leverage that smart contract to exercise control. So it's really about saying, can we use permissioned control of load devices to reduce the amount of capital that we need to invest in the system? So the argument would always be, in the long run, we will need to invest in physical assets, but we can certainly optimize the capital in the physical asset by leveraging digitalization and exercising flexibility by using permission control. So I hope that clears it up. Pat, do you want to add anything?
No, thank you, Chair. Thank you, Chair. I thought I answered him earlier in the chat. That's why I was silent. Yeah, very much it's sort of a ledger type account whereby there's pre-arranged approval between the peers such that you don't need central clearing of a transactional in real time. So that's purely as an example that I illustrated. Thank you.
Thank you. And question three, and this would be for Malcolm. How will Eskom handle the issue regarding the connectivity tariff where Eskom wants to charge the consumer whether the latter has gone renewable? And the way it's being communicated in the mainstream media at present is not going to fly with any of the affected prosumers. Really interesting topic. Malcolm, and then I'm going to ask Dave to add in as well.
Sure. Thank you, colleagues. I am not a tariff specialist on the matter. But I think key to this, I think we should do realize there are two challenges that the industry, and so I'm not going to comment on the tariff issues, but I will suggest the following challenges that exist. One, a tariff is not properly unbundled. Two, it's not cross-reflective. Three, you need to clearly have a tariff structured in a way that you clearly understand what you cost to serve, meaning this is what I cost for generation, transmission, and distribution. As you see evolution happening from most of the tariff reform that's happening across the world, there's a difference between a fixed charge and a variable charge. And I think Dave alluded to this issue about fixed and variable charge. One, your fixed charge are normally a pure monopoly charge that is saying you have access to the wires. Your variable charge is normally a retail charge that really says this is the energy that I'm selling or buying. But in noting that your fixed charge is normally constituted around the capex investments, all of those things on the pure monopoly side, we need to acknowledge one thing. The distributor of the future invariably would be the battery, because it's just going to be cost too much and high around for yourself to consume everything. And if there's no sun, you would like to have a backup per se. And in my mind, if you look at the Taiwan case study, installing batteries remotely and allowing members and people to actually pump that energy back, and during load shedding you give that energy back or use that energy for dispatchability, or all relevant case studies that is being deployed somewhere else. And as the industry evolves, I'm certain we will evolve to that side. Key to this is also instability, flexibility, dove curve, the fact that most of those inverters are going to create interesting challenge for the monopoly wires business. Chair, I would like to suggest to you that activation or removing of customers that is paying, clearly our digital population would suffer, as we know. So I'm not talking to the tariff reform that is required, and depending on who you speak to, we are here or there. I'm really speaking to why I do believe there needs to be a decomposition of this, and also the fact that there would be a fixed charge as we move forward. This is a technical problem and not an accounting term as we move forward. But I think Hans can also talk about the issue around, unbundling these tariffs and how that would be. If we look, and I'm sorry, I'm not the tariff expert. If you look at most of the first world country, taxation on the tariff portion is actually significant, and I don't want to quote the numbers. I may quote them wrong, but it is a significant amount. And actually your fixed charge and your variable charge are actually small, because the taxation deals with encouraging IPPs. We want to do smart rollout, and that taxation levy is almost added onto that for special programs, and also the normal tax that is on the tariff. So I think we need to accept that the tariff will have to transform. What is the right amount, and what should South Africa do? Chair, I don't really have a view on that, Chair. And I think those are more policy decisions that we need to make. But we need to make sure it's the least regret option, that so we all can win and the industry doesn't die at the same time. Thank you, Chair.
Thank you. I'm going to call next on Dave, because Dave, you also raised the topic, and then we will rotate to Hans for some final comment on this question.
Thank you. I think this goes back to one of the fundamental weaknesses or issues in the current transition. When the electrical industry, ESI as we know it today, was being developed in the 1920s and 30s, and the US is the best example because that's the most legalistic example, it was explicit that there was recognition that if you didn't do some kind of cross-subsidization, you would end up with the big industry and rich people having power and nobody else having power. And therefore, the idea was you created monopolies which said, you will recover your money out of the sales. And this is a classic Esrom model, if you look at the Esrom model pre-A2. But you're required to provide everyone with power as they demanded. And so the reality is, if you're going, I think we recognize, if you're going to a free market system, a proper deregulated market which runs, then you've got to get the tariff to match the income. And this is one of the fundamental problems. And I put it in very South African terms. I was talking to a guy a couple of years ago, it was a couple of years ago now, who was saying that from Joburg City Power, and he was saying that the average cost of maintaining a connection for was between, I think, about 10,000 Rand a year. Let's say 1,000 Rand a month today. What he was essentially saying was that forget the fact that Eskom's 1 Rand a unit is over 50% fixed. He's saying they should be saying to the customers in Alex that you're going to have 1,000 Rand a month bill for your prepayment meter, but your cost of power will only be 1 Rand a unit, and that won't work. It doesn't work. And the trouble we've now got is that fundamental agreement. It's like now at the moment with Eskom. Everyone's turning around to Eskom and saying Eskom's failing the industry. And I'll be quite blunt. Eskom has no obligation to supply. It's not in the rules anywhere. That's the job of the regulator, to create the market conditions to make the market work, which he's palpably failed at doing. But the interesting one is that Eskom has no obligation to supply. Eskom shouldn't actually, and nobody has an obligation to supply in this country. And that the comment that Eskom's model has failed in this country is actually a misnomer, because Eskom's model, if I use a classical old-fashioned model, was destroyed, was closed down by the government in the mid-1990s. Eskom was no longer the last supply. It was not to build power stations. The free market would. And we sat in a complete free market system from 98 to 2004, which is the underlying crisis we're now in, because nobody came to the marketplace, because everybody who came to see us from overseas said, you're too cheap in Eskom, what's your subsidy? I remember somebody saying to them, we were lent £5,000 by the government in 1923. Does that count?
It's a great answer.
And it is sobering that when all this discussion of rearranging the marketplace, the classical thing you do in the world is you benchmark against the best operating guy doing your business in the world. In 2000, Eskom was the, quote, world's best utility, according to Financial Times. Not a single person came and said, how do you run your business? Because the answer was the wrong answer. With that, I'll close down and leave you. But essentially, my answer is that, yes, it would be great if, for me, as a large household consumer, the rich people, going to the new tariff Eskom's talking about would be great. The problem you're seeing is that the vested interests in selling solar panels, for example, is complaining bitterly that the business case for solar panels gets destroyed. Certainly batteries gets destroyed by Eskom putting in a more sensible time of use tariff and fixed charges and 50 cents a unit for power. Whether it'll come off, I doubt it, because political pressure, but lobby groups are powerful.
Absolutely. Hans, would you like to comment about some of the international experience around unbundling the tariff into fixed and variable charges?
Yes, I will try. Sorry for not having my camera on. Now I'm on my mobile, so I'm suffering some issues with my network. But I think I fully understand what people have said before. So the key for me is that you need to know what you are paying for, right? So one of the biggest issues, to be blunt about it in South Africa now, the biggest issue is that when Eskom say that our planned load shedding is between 4 and 8 this afternoon, what do people do that have batteries or that have some flexibility in their consumption? Of course, yes, what they do, they consume as crazy before 4 o'clock to either charge stuff or to run their dishwasher or whatever, because there is no let's say, no cost for them to do that with a fixed regulated tariff. And I also understand what David said just before me is that what if the customers cannot afford this? It really doesn't matter. Kind of, if you subsidize Eskom to run everything at the low regulated rate, still that cost has to be covered by somebody. And if you don't have, and if you don't know what you are essentially paying for, so you need to kind of, you need to disentangle, let's say, the cost of the various services that now Eskom is performing. So again, you got your energy charge with the pure energy. You got your, let's say, you should have a charge to both TSOs and DSOs for they providing the network to you. There should be some form of payment for the balancing services that at least the TSO is providing, potentially in the future also DSO. And those should be different, let's say, cost elements in your tariff. If that sums up to an electricity system that you cannot afford to run, yes, then there might be a political intervention saying that for these kind of vulnerable consumers, we'll do a subsidy for you. But don't bundle all that into the tariff, because then if you, Dave, are a rich customer, you are the one that is exploiting the system. Because you can then lean on this too low tariff and kind of utilize that and exploit that from your point of view. So in my view, and what we've seen in many other places, and I think this is one of the things that I know that has been discussed also for South Africa, is the fact that when you move to an unbundled tariff, you do that, you find the real cost of operating the system, and then you put in the subsidy scheme for those who cannot afford to pay that. Of course, this is a tough thing for the politicians, and this is also kind of all over the world, because then suddenly that bill gets kind of out in the open. So how much are really the governments supporting the people, let's say, through the power prices? So that is my, you should, because then you can also scrutinize Eskom transmission, that they are spending too much on system services. But now you get a big gray bucket of money that you give to Eskom, and this is the payment for everything that you do, which is totally wrong.
Yeah. Thanks for that. No, I think it opens up the conversation that it's really important, if we want to see a functional marketplace, that we've got visible, traceable costs, and we can then make subsidy decisions once we know what those cost structures are. But I would agree that it's naive to think that the state won't have a role to play in subsidizing and supporting vulnerable customers. And that's a model that applies all over the world. It doesn't matter where you go. That is the role of government, which is to support those people who are vulnerable, because the free market cannot do it. It's just not designed to do it. So it's an important consideration. I want to move on to a really interesting question posed around security. How do utilities prepare themselves to manage and mitigate the cybersecurity risk that will become commonplace with the digitalization of power systems? Pat, can I pass this question to you and then to Malcolm?
No, thank you, Chair. I did also answer it on the chat, but let me just repeat it here. Colleagues, reflect on the internet. When the internet started, cybersecurity capacity and capability grew up in parallel. And today we take an example of online banking. I do all my online banking on the application, and we've got confidence that the checks and balances are working. You take, for example, Capitec as a bank. There's no physical transactional counter available anymore. Everything's on the app. So I think the confidence will grow in the energy sector as the markets mature. Thank you.
Malcolm.
Yes, colleagues, I think this is significantly one of those big challenges around digitalization and the transformation that is happening between OT and IT. Traditionally, IT was predominantly seen as the space that is more the polluted space, and we physically have a firewall between the IT and the OT space. As we transform into the more digitalized world, what is pure OT systems and what's pure IT systems becomes gray, somewhere in between. And the fact that substations in itself will become a computer room, and the fact that substations themselves that our engineers and technicians and artisans will have to have certain skills that is actually linked to IT, because it's becoming so much software driven amount of data it's generating. And that is a reality of the future. If we look at Ukraine attack number 2, it was a state-approved attack from Russia that resulted into shutdown of certain of their plants, and literally they penetrated through the IT system straight into the OT systems, and they literally controlled the power system control room from a well-organized attack per se. So the complexity of attacks is varying from very simple change the password to literally state-run attacks as we move forward. And this you could see in the US and all of those other things. Do we have enough skills in the industry? And the answer is literally no. Do we address that? The answer is yes. But what we are seeing more and more, the more we train them, the more they leave and they become really marketable to leave to other areas where it's significantly more lucrative, because utilities doesn't pay as good as banks and mines these days. 6 years without an increase becomes a problem. So I think the reality is that this journey we need to be going on this journey. We need to be equipping, we need to be skilling as much people as possible, and then will be set programs that will be in place. The grayness between IT and OT will exist. However, you have to design security. You can't latch it on. When designing your systems and standardizing your systems, it has to be keeping cybersecurity in mind. And that's why the conflict between IT and OT will constantly exist, because of that dilemma and the grayness that exists. Jay, yeah, maybe I'll stop at that point. Too much said.
Another really interesting question, and this is probably going to go towards Pat, Malcolm, and Dave. How are the resource-embarrassed municipalities going to be brought on board? Because at present, the perception is they're light years away from meeting some of the digitalization objectives, and they're missing some of the fundamental enablers, and think of SCADA and ADMS. Let's start with Malcolm on this one, and then we'll go to Prof. Pat.
Maybe can I give Prof the opportunity? Yeah. I'll just talk too much. Thanks.
No, thank you, Malcolm. Thank you. Yeah, colleagues, going into the future scenario, the capacity and capability will be delivered both by man and by machine, and you're going to find a lot of specialized providers come forward. So there would not be the challenge on resource-stretched municipalities to grow internal capacity. You can outsource that, and that outsourcing capacity and capability can form part of the contract going forward. Thank you.
Dave.
I believe if the will is there and the project is there, the skills appear. That sounds an odd thing to say. I just give a quick example. I ran a project called the Pebblebed Modular Active Project in the 1990s and 2000s. We started out with absolutely nobody in the country. And I mean that because we had any clear idea how these things work. We had a few theoretical physics guys, but essentially we had some engineering guys. And within 5 years, we were the world's leaders in the technology, and probably to some extent still recognized as such. So my belief is it's almost, build a stadium and they will come. I think that if we can incite people to work for Munich on this kind of area, it should work. The problem is having the belief and the policy we're going forward. I don't believe it's a skill. People are there, but people, the average person is the average person. I believe in a standard bell curve. I know wherever you go in the world, there's a ton of idiots and geniuses. Just you haven't exposed them all. So that's my strong belief. I don't see a problem of skills. Never have. If the project's put together, clearly you need somebody to start it. But we have enough skills in the country. I don't see that as being a major challenge. I see a challenge being governance inside the Munichs, and clearly it's a concern about the dysfunctional Munichs is clearly a concern to everybody. But this is just one example of that.
Yeah. it's a great segue into the next question. With so many municipalities and metros and Eskom, can there be enough collaboration to achieve the necessary digitalized energy trading and flexibility platforms? Or is there a need to reform and restructure the distribution industry first? This would probably drive some strong opinions. Prof. Pat, I'd like to start with you, and then I would want to go to Hans.
Yeah, no, thank you, Chair. Chair, my thoughts is that the future capacity and capability will be mostly delivered by machines rather than men. So, and again, yeah, I believe that the human capability should be grown in the field of Industrial Revolution 4.0. So I'd invite colleagues to visit the website universityofjohannesburg.ac.za and look at the range of online short learning programs and postgraduate programs that are available in this field. And I think this is where the human can come forward, upskill, and be available to handle any particular challenge or any particular opportunity going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Yeah, Lloyd, can I?
Yes, please do, Malcolm.
Yeah. And I'm of the view that the transformation of the industry, and especially the distribution industry and the market as a whole, has to be co-created and transformed using a model that I see worked quite successfully in the UK and quite successfully in Europe. And what invariably happens is that they create associations actually driven by the regulator, not policymakers, to co-create the future. And all industry partners then fundamentally assist in the development of pilots, processes, as they move forward. And I think Hans alluded to a number of projects, and to say that there is actually much more projects that looks at the market evolution for the distribution, flexible market, and the distribution as a whole itself. I think this achieves three things invariably. One is the skills development, noting that the more we evolve from a technology side, skills co-create and co-developed in that process. I think the reality is that a retention of those skills and the bell curve, as Dave alluded to, that's true. So significantly, you have to develop the industry as a whole so that if anybody jumps out of this process, you're significantly able to sustain with the masses as you move forward. The other aspect is also in managing the evolution of technologies so that it is co-created and assists the industry to evolve as you move forward. And then the last bit is the issue of partnership. Most of those projects that you actually see that Hans alluded to, it's not one or two people doing it. It's an Eskom, a Metro, and a Munich collaborating with the university and other consultancies and some IT firm together running a project to prove a concept to assist the regulator and the policy makers to make decisions. This allows the industry to evolve together and not leapfrogging into a future, I apologize with blockchain, into future where we have not learned how to run and walk. Certain of our metros and Munichs is currently not having a proper SCADA system, proper telecommunication infrastructure. You will never unlock the future if you do not have the foundational aspects in place. And foundationally, that is very, very important as you move forward. And then evolving the skills, because it's a different type of skill that you require in the future, not the skills that you have today. Yeah, I think that is my 2 cents.
In fact, if you wouldn't mind coming off mute and coming on video, there's a set of really interesting questions to you. Perhaps the starts one, which would want to draw your attention. Time of use tariffs make a lot of sense, being able as a device to balance supply and demand. How does the department think we're going to finance the installation of millions of smart meters in South Africa?
Okay, okay. Thanks, Lloyd. I'm not sure the last part if I got about the financing of the smart meters. But yes, time of use tariff actually plays a role to balance the demand. I think when we're at UJ, there's a paper that we wrote about that that shows that if you use different tariffs at different times, you can actually manage to balance the demand and supply. And there are also a lot of people that had other different tariff models that can help in that. That is definitely one of the things that can be used. For the longest time, by the way, we had a problem with the flat, especially for house like residential, that our tariff is flat. We felt that it's also one of the causes of this imbalance. If Eskom were to implement that, we think that will actually have a positive result.
Could there be a use case that says all the AMEU members need to actually adopt time of use and move to time of use? And is there a possibility that as part of the energy efficiency program of the departments, that could be a strong driver, because that would create the business case and drive investment in demand side management and demand response?
Yes, that can be, but currently COGTA is actually running that in terms of just the tariff part of it. It's actually COGTA who's doing a lot of work in tariff. But I don't see a reason why the Department of Energy won't get involved if there is actually a need to do that.
Yeah,
but it's something, it's a very interesting thing actually to look at, and I'm glad somebody raised it, and I think it's something that we must definitely look into it moving forward.
and I think, thank you for raising that. It's the classic coordination collaboration problem across multiple stakeholders who've got slightly different responsibilities. Can you deal with the other interesting question, which is that some metros are not even paying Eskom, so it's unlikely that they're going to attract any kind of investment, simply because those investors are going to fear that there's going to be no return or payments, and that the risks are simply too high.
A good question. Private capital is not a charity case. They will definitely assess all the risk, and where the risk doesn't make sense, they won't invest. We have municipalities that are bankable. We have municipalities that are not bankable. For example, the city of Cape Town can rock into any bank and get money to do whatever they want to do because they are financially sound. But actually, that's the case with the majority of the municipalities. They are not really paying Eskom, and we, from the department, we use that as a criteria that anybody who is not paying, for example, Eskom, cannot participate in the program. But if you read the news, Tshwane owes Eskom 1.6 billion rand. They gave them 14 days. They will disconnect. So you can't bank on municipalities not paying Eskom, because that party is definitely coming to an end.
Thank you. And perhaps a question, why you use the LED lighting retrofit use case. Perhaps the argument could be that there are a lot of other more energy intensive consuming devices, such as heating and cooling.
No, actually, especially for public entities that are interested, they can contact the department. We can actually give them a full presentation on that. Actually, it's not the LED example is easy for me to mention, but we actually looking at everything that consumes energy. So that question where you're talking about cooling and heating, yes, those are actually the projects that we want, because some of the funders actually from, especially international funders, that's what they're asking. They want big projects. So if you tell them about lights, first question they ask, are you going to give us the lights of the whole country? Because that's how they feel that project is going to be big enough. But in the nutshell, we want everything. We want your water treatment plants. We want to do everything in your buildings and so forth. Yeah.
Thank you so much. Here is perhaps a really difficult question, which I'm going to run past each panel member in turn. So stay on, because this is coming your way. How does South Africa avoid what has happened in Germany over the last 20 years, where about 360 billion euros was invested to double the installed capacity, but somehow power production over the same period has remained flat? So it's really about, how do we see the energy transition actually creating more energy availability on the grid, rather than just transitioning power source 1 for power source 2, but actually create that additional capacity that the economy can grow and we can see the electrification of those end loads.
Yeah, I think it's the same problem that I mentioned in the beginning, because they actually transformed the supply side without actually transforming the demand side. So
yes,
they put renewable on the same system. That's why now the generation looks flat. But that's why even if you go from GMRE now, they tell you that anything to do with renewable, you must first do the energy efficiency part of it, because if they went that route of energy efficiency first, they were going to have an actually access power. I think that was their issue. So, and I think even in South Africa, we must avoid that.
I think you nailed it. Prof. Pats, your thoughts?
Thank you, Chair. No, that's a good question and a good reflection on Germany. My view on transition is as follows, Chair. We've got a collection of what I would term black electrons. There's a lot of black electrons. And then we want to migrate towards a collection of green electrons. And somewhere in between, we have a collection of blue electrons. These sort of hydros and the nucleus sit in that space. The clean energy resources as such. But the dominant collection of electrons are black electrons. And if we look at it from that point of view, I would have encourage Germany to hold on to your black electrons. Don't just close them all off. You've got to keep a very stable, secure power system when we start the transition. Incorporate all the blue electrons. Hold on to your nucleus, hold on to your hydros. Don't switch them off. Then migrate, and we all must agree that we've got to migrate to the green electrons. And you migrate in an orderly fashion to the green electrons. As the green electrons come up to speed, mature, and take their rightful position within the electricity supply sector, you can start closing down the black electrons. But don't close the black electrons before you got the green electrons mature. And then somewhere in between, you need to manage the blue electrons. And again, don't just dismiss your nucleus and your hydro and say, we don't need it. We only want renewable sunshine and wind. Then you have a challenge thereafter. So I would encourage all to go along the path of orderly transmission, defined transition. And I think China is doing that very responsibly right now. And you could even see China's come short with the impact of climate change, given the high ambient temperatures and the impact it's having on their hydro resources. So there you go. Let's do it orderly and we'll get success. Thank you.
Thanks, Prof. Pats. Let's go to Malcolm for your closing thoughts on this topic.
I do agree that with Prof around the orderly manner in which I am not positioning my response as an Eskom representative, but just my response as an engineer. I always believe there's a mix. The question is, what's the right mix? And let's talk about the blue and the red electrons in Germany per se. The way Germany transformed significantly their green electrons, they targeted and they significantly moved. However, they compensated that with gas. And this was to compensate the reality of the closing off of the nuclear stations and the building of significant interconnectors on their network. Currently in the political arena, what's happening in the world, this has resulted obviously to an increase in the price in Europe as a large because of the dependency of gas. And the way Europe has utilized renewables is fundamentally they don't have a lot of batteries, but they have a lot of number of interconnectors and gas to compensate that flexibility and introduce dispatchability as you move forward. This obviously allowed them to reduce the number of black electrons as they move forward. So back to a South African context, the result is that if we become heavily dependent on gas as a variable, be it flywheel, batteries, or gas, to assist us in dispatchability, this may introduce obviously our dependency on foreign exchange, what happens globally, and our price of electricity Unfortunately, as you'd see, I think you presented or Hans presented how stable it was, and with the unrest in Ukraine, the price significantly increased because that dispatchability is currently not there. And now Europe and Germany as a whole is seeing significant prices increase. For Norway, which has a lot of green, not green, but blue electrons, which is hydro. We don't have hydro. We have potential of gas, and we have significant increase in green. But duly noted, we have to compensate the green with base station, because a power system is not about megawatts. It's the management of megawatts that makes the difference. And I think there is a significant focus on the green electrons. The question is, what is the correct mix as we move forward? Thank you.
Thank you. Hans, are you back? And if you are, we'll give you a chance. Otherwise, we will move to Dave for closing comments.
I'm here. Yeah.
Thank you, Hans.
Somehow, yeah. No, but I think the key here, as also, let's say, piggybacking a bit on Malcom on this, is that I think actually again, there is no correct answer. I think that is the case, because as Malcom said, kind of the German solution was okay for Germany, but it cost a heck a lot of money in subsidies from the government. Yeah, and still the German citizens are paying a large amount of a green tax to pay or continue to pay for what they've done. So focusing a bit back to what I said earlier, I think engage the whole industry, try to find the South Africans.
It's so disappointing to you, Hans, again. But Hans was making a really critical point, which is that this is an industry
else and copy. Just try to learn from the mistakes that we have done, and try to develop something that can work for South Africa, because I think there is a way out. It's going to be hard, but there is a way out. But do the steps in the right order. So again, you need to look at the tariffs like we talked about earlier. Without doing that, it will be very hard, because suddenly then you can do bilateral trade without paying for system services. And then you can create an unfair market. So there is a lot of things that should be focused on in the overall reform process to make this work. I think that will be my final comment on this.
Hans, thank you so much. Dave, one final thought.
Final thought, with 360 billion euros, sorry, 360 billion euros, you can buy about 72 gigawatts of nuclear power, which is more than Germany currently needs. If you add back the 30% they got rid of. So the short answer is Germany. German example is, in fact, a catastrophic failure. They didn't close their coal stations down. They kept them running there, talking of closing down by 2038 or something, and they're now restarting coal stations. They relied upon massive importing of gas from Russia, but couldn't work out how to contract for it long term. So they ended up with the present problem, which started, by the way, before the invasion of Ukraine. So the gas problem was before the Ukrainian invasion. It just made it worse, but the Russians are still pumping gas, for crying out loud, through the Ukraine. I think what we're seeing is the real question we asked is if people put forward a model which says this is the success story, you should follow it. And Germany is once often quoted. You end up with the German dysfunction. They've closed down their nuclear fleet, which was 30% of their power, very good power stations, very reliable ones. They've kept their coal fleet going because they have no choice. They've relied upon importing and neighboring, and there's a very big discussion of the fact that they've been dumping power on neighbors to the point where Poland has said at one point they didn't want any more German connections because they couldn't take this disruption of their market by dumping negative priced energy into their market. They've relied upon the Nordic countries as a big battery, because they've basically been trading with the Nordic countries as a big battery. We haven't got. I mean, with all due respect, maybe there may be some mountains in Lesotho, but it ain't going to be the same as Norwegian grid. And so I think we'll be careful looking again at where has what solution worked. And I think the German example and the California one is another one of the exact same situation. The amount of money spent on the tariffs you've got don't reflect a success. And yet it's seen as a success. So the question you ask is, the success is stable power. And there's a question that was asked, I'm going to answer very quickly. There was a comment about the AMEU, about the EIUG, looking at they couldn't have load power. It is worth bearing in mind that we stopped all industrial growth in 2008, 2006, 2008, because there was no power. It wasn't because of the crisis. And everyone says, oh, but every other country has had a similar leveling of their power. The OECD countries have, but the non-OECD countries have not. And we have basically lost a third of our economy because of lack of capacity on the grid, because you don't build an industrial plant unless you've got secure power, and secure power is presently seen to be something large and lumpy. Not because if you believe in microgrids and all those things, then there should be no concern about Eskom's survival. We're not concerned at SAIEE surviving. We're not concerned at Telkom surviving, because those really are fully commercial activities where we don't need the national anymore. I would argue that the simple question of any utility like roads and things is, if we take away the state operator, is there a challenge? And the answer is, if you take Eskom away, there's a massive challenge. QED, it's not a fully commercial market, and we're trying to make a market from something which is very difficult to make a market of. But in terms of Germany and California, if they put that money into building little more nuclear power stations, they wouldn't be affected by the gas price.
So point well made.